President and founder of Veris Technologies. Today, we are talking about agronomy and technology. As you know, this topic is called Soil Matters. That's the title of this video series. In order to manage soil properly, we have to use technology. We have to use GPS, sensors, controllers, software. And we're really excited today to have Michael Gomes with us. Mike is the Vice President of Business Development at Topcon. He's been in the precision or digital ag world for 25 years, and he's had a foot in both the technology side and the agronomy side. So he's really in kind of the catbird seat to help us figure out where the industry's been, where it's headed, and how we can employ technology to help us manage soil to its ultimate potential. So Mike, welcome. Good to see you.
Great seeing you, Eric, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk on soil matters today. And so I hope that we can, continue down the journey. It's certainly interesting, and I always like the opportunity to be able to work with professionals like yourself.
So where are you this morning or today?
Well, today I'm out in California, and I'm sheltering in place as I have been for the past 9-10 weeks here in the land of fruits and nuts. And so I'm in back bedroom number 2 because the rest of the family's still asleep or waking up. But so you don't quite have me from the home office. You got me from the second office, or as my daughter likes to refer to it as, is the room where Dad goes to call people type of thing.
Well, hopefully your wife isn't wondering when your next business trip is. Hopefully she's still tolerating.
She is amazingly, but I appreciate it. Thanks.
So let's start off this conversation. And so you are the main crystal ball viewer at your company, right? With different strategy and where the business is headed. How do you have that perspective? What are your tips and tricks in how you do your job to stay abreast of these changes?
Well, so as the Vice President of Business Development, that means I sit a lot of times in between the sales guys and the product guys and to figure out where we're headed. For me, the number one thing is the ability to listen, right? And that's listen to your customers, and sometimes to your competitors. To me, it's about looking at the landscape and then understanding kind of where you're going in that landscape, or where you have. And so one of the things that I found really useful in this whole thing was when I got into precision ag long time ago, when I first met you, I started reading a lot of Lewis and Clark, and Lewis and Clark, the way that they would navigate is that they asked the Indians. And they would ask the same question, and when they got the same answer 3 or 4 times, they would then put it on the map and then go to the next spot and ask the Indians. And so I've always found out that the best way for me to navigate an industry where I don't know what I'm doing is to listen to the locals and to take a look at the landscape. And so for me, that's a lot of what I do in the industry.
So one of the things that I believe you've learned in agriculture that I wanted to follow up on with you is the idea of adoption curves. We've all seen the original adoption curve of the early majority and innovator, early, laggards, late majority, all that curve. Tell us a little bit about how you see the precision agriculture curve actually taking place.
Sure thing. And one of the things that I found most useful when we talk about technology products is the use of what they call Gartner's hype cycle. And when the first time I saw it, it really spoke to me. And so if you'd like, I can use a little bit of that. And so
it had an effect on me when I saw it for the first time. So yes, please do.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So there we go. And can you see that all right?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. So to me, it was, Gartner's hype cycle. It's the idea that there's a technology trigger and that the customer actually buys right before they get to that peak of inflated expectations. And we've all been there before, right? When you think about how this has fit in or the last purchase you made of a few $100s, the idea that you evaluate a couple of alternatives and then you finally make the choice and you pull the trigger and you make a buy decision, right? And as soon as that happens, you begin to come up with, oh, did I buy the right thing? Oh, what about this? Or, oh, and then when you take delivery of the product, you begin to work with it, or you install it, or things like that. And you begin to start to overcome hurdles, and I didn't know it was going to do it quite like that. And some of those things. And then once you get it in, so then you kind of hit that trough of disillusionment. And at that point, then you start to really use and work with the product, and you start, okay, it can do this and that, and so that way, as you begin to get educated about that product, then you kind of get to the point where it's useful, right? And that's what they refer to in Gartner's hype cycle as the plateau of productivity, right? And we do this with everything, whether it's a new app on my phone, or a new, a new toy, a new tool. I see that we go through this a lot. And for me, I found that this is pretty useful in that respect. And so for me, one of our biggest challenges in the industry is, how is it that we really manage this? And for me, this is all about managing customer expectations. It's being able to understand where customers are, being able to have that customer empathy, walk a mile in their shoes, understand how they're using your tools and your products, and then moving forward with that. And for me, that has a lot to do with customer service, customer support, what that customer experience looks like. And because we sell technology products, and so we're helping people to understand how to learn to use them, that means that it's a lot about managing those expectations, but it's also, being good enough to get on first base. And for me, that's a big piece of the puzzle.
So where do you see us today on this hype cycle in precision agriculture?
Well, I think that, I, with respect to this hype cycle, I think that in many cases, we're at the plateaus of productivity, but I think that, as new entrants come in, they a lot of times come in and they arrive and they blow up. Right. So for example, like with a technology, with a well understood technology like auto steering, we're well into the plateau of productivity. With the equipment efficiency aspects, we're well into the plateau of productivity. Other times, I think that as with some of the things like telematics, I think we're certainly coming through the slope of enlightenment, because people are still learning how to use them, and how some of those things fit. And so I think when it comes to many aspects of the digital tools, we're kind of up there in the peak of inflated expectations, right? Everybody sees the vision, everybody sees where this can go, but they're not quite sure how to get there. And so I think that you have to just be conscious of what tool you're using and where you are, so that way you can begin to manage your expectations of, okay, where am I in this process and how I think it'll fit.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I know the first time I saw this, I thought all adoption curves followed the normal adoption curve of, the early adopter, early majority, and then over the peak, and it goes on down from there. So the first time there was a downturn in precision ag, there were people kind of started entering the trough of disillusionment. I thought, well, maybe it's over. Maybe this was it. We had our run in precision ag, and this is the only people going to adopt it. And then once we went on a few more years, began to see that, oh no, that was just a peak of hype, of inflated expectations. So I think, Mike, the reason I'm glad you shared this and considered it important is, if you think it's over and you think there's no need to try to do better using the new digital tools, you have a different view of the whole industry and why you should continue working towards it. And so I think this is great.
Right. And so that's where, with each tool, right, when I adopt auto steering, I go through the hype cycle. When I adopt variable rate, I go through the hype cycle. When I adopt some aspect of imagery or sensing or some things. In many cases, I go through the hype cycle. And so for me, the key there is time, right? It's the idea that I just got to work the problem. I would say that nobody likes change, but everybody loves progress. And the difference is purpose. For me, it's all about what's the purpose that I'm going through this for. And so really starting to drive aspects of that is a big deal to me.
Okay, good. Let's move on. I got a couple more questions I want to ask you. We're going to try to keep this limited to 15, 20 minutes, but I really want to cover some other things.
Sure thing.
Let's see. There we go. There we go. Not that I want to see myself, but hey. So next question I've got for you: if we think about coming up out of that trough of disillusionment, which all happens, one of the things that moves us out of that is new developments in the industry that come alongside and help move that up. As you've seen the industry in the last 25 years, you've seen a lot of new advancements. You have to have some real surprises about things that came along. Even though your crystal ball is good, it's not perfect. What are some of those things that have actually caught you by surprise of how well they've been adopted, and what can we learn from how those were adopted?
Well, so for me, I would say, with some of the basic things, the things that really took me by surprise were the adoption rates, right? And so that's where, like, for example, with auto steering, right? And the first year that came out, we thought we were going to sell maybe 10 or 20. And so when we broke 50, we were kind of surprised with ourselves. And so for me, it's really, you see aspects of that equipment efficiency side, right? The equipment efficiency, because it was very, very easy to understand. And for me, the biggest efforts around this is really, it's about what's profitable for the customer, right? And so it's aspects of, can your customer make money with the technology, and does it fit their operations? Because for me, IoT is basically, it's where operations technology meets the information technology. And so as long as that's profitable, right? Because the one thing about farmers is they are excellent exactors of value. And so in the fact that when they can understand how this fits to their operation, how it fits in with their guys, and how they can begin to utilize this technology in order to accomplish what makes money for them. Because the one thing about farming operations or agronomic operations is that everybody's a little bit different, and how everybody makes profit is just a little bit different. And so that's where I know that with Veris, you've always been about sound agronomic principles. And so really understanding, to me, it's where the agronomy meets the profitability. When those two pieces meet together, now we're cooking with gas, right? And so now that thing can take off. And so I think that there are a lot of spots where you can do that. And I think it has to do with finding tools that fit your workflow. And I think a lot of those things, I think on-the-go sensing is a big piece of that puzzle moving forward for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So where do you see the future going? Speaking of where you see it going, go into that a little more detail of the on-the-go sensing, and just how are we going to use technology to manage our agronomy better in the future?
Well, to me, why are we doing all this stuff? Why, again, change is, nobody likes change, but but everybody likes progress, right? So what's the progress, Mike? What's the goal we're headed for? And for me, that goal is what they call the digital twin. We see this a lot of times in construction. It's the idea of a representation. Really what you see is that this whole thing is agriculture and construction are beginning to go through the digitization as an industry. And so when you begin to digitize, that means you head towards what they call a digital twin. And I thought that Kansas State, somebody that you're pretty familiar with, did a great job of putting this together. And so if you'd like here, let me share a little bit about what that looks like there. So yeah, so here we go. That's the previous one. Yeah. And where can you see that a little bit of this?
Yes. Yes.
It's the idea. I like this representation by Kansas State, because you see their time across the bottom, just like the Gartner hype cycle, and you see sensors, whether those are sensors in the air or sensors there in the ground. You see tractors and center pivots, right? And really, but what you see is everybody talks about, well, this information up in the cloud. And so that's where you see this cloud-based analytics. It's the idea that in the real world, I'm taking and I'm making a copy of what's in the real world. I use sensors to make a copy of that. And that's called that's that cloud-based piece, right? And so that's the virtual. So I've got my real farm down on the ground, and then I use digitization in order to create a virtual farm. And when I get a virtual representation of my farm up in the cloud, now I can begin to do things like simulation analysis. I can begin to say, okay, hey, if I'm going to take, if I'm evaluating two hybrids, I can put them into my digital model, and I can say, okay, wow, well, if it's going to be a wet year this year, if I think that it's going to be a wet year, what's that going to do? Versus if it's going to be a dry year, what's that going to do? And so I think that it's tools of these, it's analytical tools that I can begin to impose into this digital model that make a lot of sense. And so for me, what's the goal in mind? The goal in mind is to get there, right? It's the idea that farmers, they want to farm for a living. Right. And you don't become a farmer because you want to be a computer jockey. You become a farmer because you like doing stuff outside. And so to me, this is a new tool, right? And so the idea that we can begin to use analytical tools like this in order to do a better job of assessing management practice, assessing profitability. If you look at what simulation analysis and being able to do just did to factory floors in the late 80s and early 90s, and how they drove efficiency, because I think that really where we are in our industry is that as Michael Porter said, we're really in a system of systems world. And because agronomics and nature, right, you've got a seed growing, all right, and then you've got the weather, and so beginning to understand how those two things impact, because it's not necessarily a direct relationship. And so I think that it takes higher tech tools like computational analysis, like this simulation. And so I think, when people go, well, why are we using sensors, and why does it have to be all that complicated? To me, it's about digitization. And as you begin to enter the digital world, or as you begin to take your farm or your agronomic operation into the digital world using tools of measurement like the Veris tools of measurement, like whether that's drones or whether that's GNSS or whether that's soil sensing, right? And to me, it's establishing that beginning baseline, because I was at one of these IoT conferences that I go to a lot, and they talked about a locomotive, right? They on a train engine locomotive, they collect 900 different parameters. Now, how many do they actually take to use to make decisions? Well, they only make decisions on 3. All right. Well, why are they collecting 900? Well, because they don't quite know what they need, right? And so to me, it's understanding the basics of what we need to begin to collect data about our farm to establish that baseline. And in establishing that baseline, then how is it that I can do a better job towards profitability? How is it that I can do a better job towards operational efficiency? And whether that's telematics and understanding when and where I'm planting, it's understanding, data from, for example, like one of our systems, the NORAC boom height control system, right? Well, most people don't realize those are sonic sensors, right? And so yes, they control the height of the boom, but the ability to be able to log data from that height of the boom, so that then, knowing how many growing days I've had, right? And knowing what hybrid I planted with, maybe from things things like Veris with maybe my soil moisture and my soil temperature, well, now I can begin to understand aspects of that simulation, aspects of that modeling, and I can begin to paint a picture, right? Or I can begin to understand representations of what I think I might come in with on a yield, or where I think I'm going to come in with profitability wise. And so I think that's kind of how the tools start to come together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Mike, I hate to break it to you, but we're both getting kind of old. So let me, and if looking at ourselves doesn't convince us of that, I'm not sure what will. As you just look in your crystal ball for the next, 10, 20 years, the rest of our career and beyond, where do you think precision ag is going to be in terms of agronomy in the next decade or two? And are you hopeful for that, or where do you come down on that?
I am super hopeful, and I want to say is if we look at the change that's gone through our industry in the last 20 to 30 years, hold on to your hats, because it's just going to get better, stronger, and faster. And so that's where I get really opportunistic about where the world's going. And so that's it's no longer the advantages of profitability are no longer just selecting a better seed or trying fertilizer treatment A or B. It's becoming, in order to get where we really need to go, it's selecting my hybrid, it's understanding baseline, it's maybe variable rate application pre-emergent, it may be just in time, and variable rate application in growing, right? And being able to match what my plant needs to exactly to the growth stage that I'm in, to the nutrients ability to uptake through the soil, right? Through utilizing the electroconductivity and CEC, so that now I can begin to understand what I think I'm going to get to for a yield. So that then I can begin to understand what I think I'm going to get to for a profitability, right? So that then I can say, okay, oh, by the way, my disease pressure is X for this plant, or my disease pressure, or my pest pressure, right, is X. How much money do I have to spend, right? At what can I comfortably afford in order to get my baseline, in order to get the yield, my yield goal, in order to nail that, right? And so to me, it's being able to use these digital tools, being able to use tools of measurement and these sensors, whether that's sensors of soil, right, like like a lot of your Veris things, or things like your iScan tool, whether it's utilizing and it's being able to bring together those data layers, right? It being able to, in a useful manner, in a way that's not just technology for technology's sake, but really a way that leads to profitability for the grower or the agronomic advisor, and servicing their customer. And so that begins to kind of distill it down to, well, what are my top three or my top five layers? What are the best management practices? What are the key productivity indicators? What are the best things that I believe that determine profitability for my farming strategy? And how is it that I measure those? How is it that I manage those? And then how is it that I drive those towards my goals? Because if we're not on this, if we don't get on to the idea of continuous improvement, right? Every year I just get a little bit better, right? It's as they talk about, a farmer has, whether he's a farmer only has 30 or 40 chances to make a yield, right? And so it's how every year, how do I get a little bit smarter? How do I get a little bit better? And so for me, if you don't start down the tools of measurement, because if I'm not measuring what I intend to manage, well, how am I going to manage it? Right. And so for me, it's about using these tools of measurement so that then I can determine what my best management practice is, and then drive towards those kinds of things.
That's great. And that's really a challenge to all of us, whether we're in the industry, to keep developing those, making them simpler, make them more user-friendly, but also to growers to keep with it and keep growing as a grower. Well, Mike, I really appreciate your sharing those thoughts. Hopefully one of these days we'll be back at trade shows, and we'll be able to see each other, and I'll be able to thank you appropriately.
No problem. Really appreciate the opportunity for Topcon Agriculture to be involved here with one of the first issues of Soil Matters as a podcast, and always appreciate our longstanding relationship with Veris and the ability to talk about where the future's going and how these tools start to work together. So I appreciate the opportunity today. Thanks very much, Eric.
Thanks, Mike. All the best to you and your family.
Yep, thanks, and stay safe and healthy.
You too. Bye.